based on the time zones you all are coming from. So guys, before we start with the session, can you all please give me a quick confirmation if you all can see my screen and hear me loud and clear as well? Perfect. Thank you so much for the confirmation, everyone. So my name is Neeraj Keria, and I've been working in this IT industry for more than 13 years now. So first of all, we are going to discuss on the concepts for the cloud computing. So first of all, if you talk about the cloud computing platform, then cloud computing is what? Cloud computing is simply, if we go back 15 years, at that point of time, if we had a requirement of deployment of any solution, then we had to set up the entire servers, we had to set up the entire databases, the entire infrastructure setup, the operating system installation, the maintenance, the scaling of the servers, fault tolerance, everything had to be maintained at our own end. All right. So in here, what we have done, now we don't have to deploy the application at our own end. Someone already has done the entire infrastructure setup at their end. And now they are giving us the access to their infrastructure containing everything that we need for deployment of the application. So we can subscribe to their infrastructure, we can add a simple cost, and then we can deploy applications on their infrastructure. And then we have to pay only for the time period and the resources that we have consumed in that time as a part of cloud computing. And that exactly is what cloud computing is all about. All right. So if we talk about Microsoft Azure, then Azure is definitely not the first platform to get into the field of cloud computing. So as we know, cloud computing was started back in, now the main player was AWS, which started back in 2006. And since then, it has been one of the global leaders that is available out there in the market for cloud computing itself since its introduction back in 2006. And Microsoft entered into the field of cloud computing back in 2010, where it has tried to compete with AWS on almost different services that is available as a part of cloud computing environment. Now, if you talk about different platforms, be it Azure, GCP, or AWS, in terms of categories of services, they have almost the same category of services, right? All right, so we were discussing about the entire Azure platform. So Azure was launched back in 2010, and since then it has been one of the leading platforms. So the first platform is reserved by AWS, having a market share of around 42%, then followed by Microsoft Azure, having a market share of around 90 to 21%, and then followed by GCP, as in Google Cloud Products, having a market share of around 11%. And then there are multiple other vendors, like we have DigitalOcean, we have Alibaba, we have VMware, we have Oracle Cloud. There are multiple other cloud platforms also available. All right. So again, in Azure as well, we get the same access to the services just like we have in AWS. We get the access to the computation services, all the platform as service. We get the access to networking components, to the serverless computing, and all the services that are available in other platforms as well. That is what is being offered by Microsoft Azure. And Azure has multiple categories of services, like we have the computation, we have the migration, storage services, database services, we have for networking, management tools, we have for the notification management system. So we have multiple services that we can explore here. All right. And now we can find the list of all the category of services by using, now here we can refer to these different categories to know more about the services offered under AWS. So here, if we take a look at these tabs, we'll be able to find all the services here. Like we have the containers, we have the computation services, we have hybrid services, we have services under Internet of Things, we have multiple services available under Azure Service Platform. Now, to sign up on AWS, to get started working on Azure, first of all, we do need to have the account. Now in AWS, what we get the access to a free tier services, correct? In AWS, we get the access to a free tier services, whereas in Azure, we get to access to our account where we get $200 of credits that we can use against our billing. That exactly is what Azure has been structured at. So to sign up on it on Azure platform, we can go to the portal section, or we can click on free account. So in case we want to create a new free account, we can click on create a new free account, and here we can click on create. So we can click on start for free, and here we have to enter the email address that we want to use while we are signing up on Azure. So if you already have the Outlook account or Hotmail account, we can log in via that particular account. So if you already have the account on Hotmail on Outlook, then we can log in by that account. Or even if we don't have any Hotmail or Outlook account, we can still sign up with the new account altogether. We can do that. All right. And if you already have the account, and we will be asked to sign in again, which we can do that, or we can create a new fresh account altogether. Now remember, just like AWS, we also have to enter the valid payment method while we are signing up on Azure, so that it can validate the payment method. Just like we do in Netflix, in Prime, we have to have a payment method added. Without that, we cannot sign up, correct? So we can enter that email address, and once we have entered that, we can click on sign in, and then we can get the access to the portal altogether. In case you already have the account created, then we can click on portal. So we have a link called portal.azure. Just like we have console.aws.com, we can type in as portal.azure.com, and here we have to enter that email address that we have used. Once we complete our sign up, we will be able to get the access to portal.azure.com. So here we can find portal.azure. We have to make sure that we log in with the account here. So currently we have logged in by using our own account. Now again, a disclaimer, even if we don't have the access to the account here, still we can deploy the resource, still we can sign up for a fresh new account, and then we can get the access to that account. We can do that. In case we don't have the access to the Hotmail account, we can create a new one, and then we can get the access. But we cannot use Gmail, we cannot use any other account if we don't have the access to the Hotmail account. We have to have the account access, then only we can get started. So once we have the access, this is a kind of dashboard that we are going to look at. So if we compare this to AWS, how exactly you find this entire platform in case you have been working on AWS? You find it to be a bit more cleaner, a bit more user-friendly, especially for the first-time visitors, or you find it a bit complex? It's a bit complex, right? Not that easy. It is also easy to navigate, but again, it's a bit complicated because that's the main reason why AWS has been able to beat Azure, especially for the beginners, because of its ease, because with the ease of usage as well, correct? So here in the home section, we can see the list of all the Azure services. And here we can see in the right section, we can see the list of all the services, all the category of services that we have. Like we have the app services, we have function app, we have the SQL database, we have the virtual servers, we have the strong accounts, virtual networks, Active Directory, Monitor, Advisor, Security Center. We have all of these services available with us. All right. And once we get now, as we can see, once we sign up on AWS, we get the access to a free tier access, right? That means we can use this free tier account here. If you want to start this, we can click on start, or we can create a new subscription that we can make use of. Now, let's say we want to start with the deployment of a storage service. Or for example, let's say we want to deploy a simple VM. VM as in, VM is, as we have seen, VM is simply a virtual machine. Let's say we want to deploy a server on which we want to deploy any application, then we can deploy a VM. Now, just like in AWS, we have the concept of EC2, Elastic Cloud Compute. Here we can also make use of the computation services, right, by the name of virtual machines. So here the name is not confusing. Here we have a simple name as virtual machine altogether. So virtual machine is a service through which we can start deploying the resources as per the requirement. For example, let's say we want to create multiple servers, multiple VMs, then we have to click on the VM settings, and then we can specify with what configuration we want to define a VM as per the requirement. So here we can click on this option which says add, and under that we have virtual machine. We can click on virtual machine. Okay, we also have to make sure that our Active Directory is set to a confirmed subscription, because again, at the end, if the Active Directory is not there, then that means we don't have a confirmed subscription, then we won't be able to deploy any resources in it. So let's do one thing. Let's switch to our Active Directory, because here, unlike AWS, it works on the subscription-based model where we have to activate the subscription. If the subscription is kept deactivated, then we won't be able to work on that subscription model. So we have to make sure that we are using that particular ID. Just a moment, let's include that subscription model. We have switched an account here, and now as you can see, now we have the active subscription model defined. Okay, we can use this as a separate account here, not a problem. So again, at the end, we are going to look at how we can deploy the VM here. So we can come back to VM. In the meantime, this is going to be activated. So here we can come back to our virtual machine environment. We can click on virtual machine. Now, once we are deploying any virtual machine, any VM, first of all, we have to choose a subscription model that we are going to use. Then we have resource group. Resource group is same like what we have seen earlier. Resource group is same like tag concept in AWS. If we are looking to combine multiple resources together, if we have multiple resources deployed together, then we can combine them by using a resource group. Like we have placement group available in AWS, same way we have a resource group available in Azure. We have refreshed the screen here, guys. So here we can choose a resource group that we have already created. So let's say here we have one resource group defined here. So now we can define the virtual machine name. Let's say here we want to call this virtual machine any name. Let's say we are going to deploy our own instance. Suppose we can, now just like we have marketplace available, we can give this any app. For example, here we can give this name as app1. We can give this a name as app1. We can define in which region we are going to deploy it. Let's suppose we want to deploy this in which region. Now, the entire cloud platform is divided into regions and availability zones. The entire cloud platform are divided in regions and availability zones. As we discussed, now instead of deploying our entire application data in a single data center, what we do, for example, we are deploying our entire data in just one single data center in Mumbai. And if we have users coming in from different parts of the globe, suppose from North Virginia, from Tokyo, from Singapore, from Frankfurt, from London, from Johannesburg. So, and if all of these users are going to be served by a single data center, then that is going to create a situation of bottleneck for us, right? Plus the entire latency for the users coming from faraway locations, the latency is going to be too high. Is going to be too high. So we don't want that. So we are going to make sure that we are choosing a region which is closer to our end user so that they can receive less amount of latency there. And here we can choose, for example, let's say here we want to deploy the application, suppose in Central India, in East Asia, in Korea Central, in Norway East. We can choose multiple regions. Now, the way regions have been divided, it is different for different cloud vendors. So we have to choose a region which fits our own requirement. For example, here we choose Central India as Asia in Asia Pacific. We can choose this. And then we can choose availability zone. So within a region, we can choose the availability zone here. In case we want to use any availability set, then we can define it as a part of our custom VPC, which we haven't defined. So we can keep it to blank for now. Then we can choose image. Image is like every VM needs to have the operating system plus a base operating system that we can start with, right? So we do have the access to Ubuntu server, to the Windows Server 2019, or to Debian, to CentOS, to SUSE server. We can choose any of the base servers. Let's say here we choose Ubuntu Server 18.04, right? And then we can choose the size of the instance. And here we can choose the size. That means the current. Now we can click on see all sizes to see what all different configurations of VMs is available under Azure. So depending upon the requirement, we have different types of configuration available. Like we have the general purpose, we have the compute optimized, we have the storage optimized, depending upon how much requirement we do need to have for different use cases. We can choose any configuration as per the requirement, as in how many cores of CPU we want, how much of RAM we want, how much of IOPS as in the input output per second, what should be the performance of the application or data stored here should be. We can define the temporary storage. That means we want to have 8 GB of storage, 32 GB of storage, 64 GB of storage supported. Now we can change the storage capacity of these volumes. Just like we have EBS volume in AWS, we can change the capacity of these volumes at any given point of time. We can easily do that. So If you want to filter them out, we can simply add a filter. We can define, okay, we are going to look for what kind of family. Let's say here we have family. Now in family, we have general purpose, we have the high performance computation. Now when we are deploying any general web servers, then we can choose general purpose application. We can choose the compute optimized for computational servers, for example, for the dedicated gaming servers, for the high performance web servers for scientific calculations when we are working with geospatial analysis, geospatial data analysis, or we want to have a high volume traffic coming up, high volume website, then we can choose memory optimize. If you are performing the big data analytical jobs, then we can make use of storage optimize depending upon the requirement, same as what we have in AWS. So we can choose any of the configurations, and then within this family, we can choose what kind of instance we want to go with. For example, let's say we want to go with B2S. Now, unlike AWS, there is no concept of a free tier access here, because at the end, once we sign up for a new account on AWS, we get the access to $200 of free credit. And if we once we exhaust that in 1 month, then we are going to pay on a pay as you go model. That means we have to pay for every penny that we are going to, for every minute of usage that we are going to consume on this particular service. That's how it is structured. And even after deployment of the resources, we can configure the environment. We can configure the entire setup as per the requirement. We can easily do that. We can change we can change the configuration. We can change the volume. We can add more volumes. We can scale up and down the resources even after deployment of these VMs. We can easily do that. All right. So once we are done, we can, let's suppose here we can choose any of the services here. Let's say here we choose, let's say just general purpose as B11. We can choose this one. Click on select. We can select this. Now here we can choose the authentication type. That means if just like when we are given the SSH connection, we can choose we want the users to get connected via a simple SSH policy or by using a password. Now key is basically a bit secure as compared to the other platforms. It is more secure as compared to the password. But again, if you're deploying Windows servers, we can also choose for password based as well, password based access. And here we can define the username. For example, this can be Azure user. We can choose a SSH public key source. That means if we are going to generate a new key pair, we can choose generate new key pair, or we can use the existing key pair or the public key as well. We can choose any of these environments. We can define the key pair name, just like we do for AWS. And here we can define the public inbound ports, just like we have security groups. We can, we want to get the access to SSH. We can define SSH. If you are deploying any web-based application, then we can give the access to HTTP and HTTPS port as well. HTTPS, if in case we do have the access to SSL, we can click on next text. Now here we can define what kind of disk we want to have. Now we have multiple disk type. We have SSD disks, and then we have the HDD based disks. Now in here we can choose the correct disk based on the requirement. That means what kind of volume we want, what kind of data we are going to store here. So we can choose between premium SSDs, and we can choose the standard or even the standard HD or standard SSD based volumes as well as per the requirement defined. All right. Let's say we choose now for hosting the application, we can choose a premium SSD. We can choose the disk compatibility. Here we can add more disks. For example, let's say here we want to keep a root volume as a root disk, and we want to add more disk for database. We want to add more disk for storing the archive files, and we can choose that kind of disk as per the requirement. All right. And in the advanced configuration, we can use the managed disk, or we can use the ephemeral OS disk storage as well. Click on next, monitoring, not monitoring, the networking services. And under networking, we can choose the network. If we want, we can create our own isolated network, just like we do that in VPC. And if we want going to deploy this in our default VPC, which is a default network given to us by Azure, then we can also do that. We can choose a subnet, in which subnet we are going to deploy this. By default, we get the access to 2.4. And how many addresses we can define in 2.4? If we are using a CIDR block as 2.4, how many IP addresses we can allocate here. Again, in case you have been working on networking, we know that when we are using 24, again, we can deploy up to 251 IP addresses in a given network. So we get 256, and out of it we get 251 IP addresses available. Absolutely. So here we get 251 IP addresses. So in 24 block, we get the access to 256 IP addresses, where 5 IPs are generally reserved. Absolutely, 0 and 255 reserved, one for the gateway, as per the address defined. Absolutely. So here we can choose subnet. In case we want to create a new VPC, we can create a new VPC. We can choose in which subnet we want to deploy it. We can define the public IP. Now this is going to be automatically generated. In case you want to create a new IP as a static IP, then we can click on create new. A new IP is going to be generated, right? We can choose the assignment as dynamic or static. If you want to use a static IP, we can choose a static IP as well. Static IP is not going to be returned even if the instance is going to be stopped, just like we have elastic IP in AWS. So even if we stop the instance, this IP is not going to be returned. If you don't want that, then we can choose it to keep it to standard. So now once we have chosen that, now we can come back, and here we can choose the security group if you want to apply a security group for the current network, or we can define the inbound ports. We can define the inbound ports that we are currently allowed. We have allowed port 80, port 443, and port 22. And then we can choose the load balancing. Suppose if you want to use a load balancing directly for this instance, then we can add this here itself. We can choose a load balancer type. We can go for the Azure load balancer or the application gateway. And then we can choose a load balancer that we may have already deployed in Azure. We can do that. So here we can click on management. Now here, if you want, we can store some kind of boot diagnostics. And then we can choose the OS type, the identity covered, the auto shutdown feature. We can define the enable backup. We can click on next advanced, where we can define any kind of bootstrap data. We can define the bootstrap data. We can define the host script. Now, when we are defining monitoring services, we can choose the monitoring and what kind of monitoring service we want to add here. And here we can, now in custom data, we can add the same bootstrap data that we have available in Azure. We can define this kind of bootstrap data with us. And here we can define tags. We can define the name value pair, and then we can click on review and create. So basically, okay, we may have missed on some of the values. Okay, we have to find the load balancer to be yes. So we have to make sure that it is kept to no. Then only we are going to deploy the resources here. So once we are done, we can simply click on review and create. And once this has been successfully reviewed, this is going to be created. So we can review all the parameters here. We can see how much of money we had to spend on a per hour basis. We can review all the parameters that we defined. Once we are done, we can simply click on create. So once we create this, a new key pair is going to be downloaded, and we have to have the access to that key pair. Then only we will be allowed to access the VM from that particular instance type. So let's wait for this one to be deployed. So now the current status of the entire resources being deployed here is going to be available in the status itself. So now that's why we had to wait for a couple of minutes, and then once the deployment has been done, we will be able to get the notification of any services being deployed here. So we have to wait for a couple of minutes for this one to be deployed. Now we can come back to the home dashboard. Now if we hit refresh, we would be able to see the resource has been deployed here by the name of app1 that we deployed, right? We can open this up, and this is a current VM that we have currently deployed with the default configuration that has been deployed in Central India pay-as-you-go model with the exact configuration that we defined here. And then if you want, we can set up the networking, we can connect to this instance, we can change the disk volume, that means disk capacity or we can change any parameter that we want to change for the current instance that we deployed on top of Azure. So that exactly is how we can work with here. And then we have multiple other services for storage. We have multiple other services for configuring the entire access level as well. That means we can define for different services. Let me show you, in case you do have the access to Active Directory, let me show you how we can work with that. So just like we have the IAM service, we can also make use of the ad management service as in the Active Directory here. So for example, here we have the Azure Ad Privilege Identity Management. So here we can, just like we have the IAM service in AWS, same way we have the Identity Management service, where we can manage the access for all the users. We can define the roles that has been defined here. We can perform the entire audit history for every resource that has been currently defined. For example, let's say we want to define the access level, then here we can click, here we have the entire access to manage roles that we can define as per the requirement. Now, just like we have the ad, now just like we have the ad summon, we have the services for IAM service. So here we can refer to the ad directory as well. So here we can search for a service with it by the name of ad directory. So basically, if we have multiple users, those who have already onboarded in Azure, and now we want to onboard the entire user base back in our own ad directory as well, then we can do that by using the ad directory. So here we can find a name. For example, suppose here we want to call the user any name. For example, here we can refer to the user section. And then under user, suppose if we want to add a new user, we can find a new user. And then we can start defining the username as well. So for example, here we can define the username. What should be the name of the user that we are going to add? For example, let's say we are going to add Chris itself. We can define the name here as Chris. We can define the first name, the last name for the user. For example, here we are going to define this as Chris, the first name of this user, the last name, and then we can define the credentials as in, we can define the groups. If this user is going to be part of a group, we can define which group. In case we have a group defined, then we can choose that particular group in which this user is going to be added. And then if you want to block sign into the user, in case you want to restrict the user, the access to this portal, then we can define it to be yes. And then if we want to give the usage location for any of the user, we can give the location as well. That means this user is going to mostly work from, no, it's like a personal detail that we are going to add here. And then we can define job title, we can define the role, and once we are done, we can have the entire user created. For example, let's say we create a user, we can click on create. And now if we come back, we will be able to see the entire user currently has been created. If we refresh it, now you can see the user already have been created here. Now, if you want to work with this user, we can simply open this user account. And now we can see what all roles we have defined for this user. What are the different administrative groups that we have assigned here? What are the application, the devices that we have currently given the access to this particular user group? So as you can see, now we have the entire user account created. Now, same way we have multiple services, other services like we have the storage service. Now, in storage accounts here, we can simply go to storage accounts. Like we have a blob storage. Now, if you want to add, just like we have the concept for S3, the same way we have the blob storage available in AWS as well. That means we can use a storage account to create the entire storage account. First, we can go to storage account, click on add. Now, when we are deploying any storage account, we can choose the same subscription model. We can choose the network. For example, we want to choose a resource group as Edureka. We can define the storage account name. Let's say we want to call this as storage for, let's say for, now this is going to be based on the DNS compliant name. Now, just like we have a DNS, we have to make sure that we are giving the same name as for the DNS itself, because again, at the end, it is going to generate a URL that is going to work for us. All right. So let's say here we are going to create a simple storage block here as storage1. Then here we can define storage11. So this is going to create this particular account that we can make use of. Now this entire value has to be unique. This entire value has to be unique because again, at the end, this is going to generate one public DNS name that we are going to make use of. And here we can define location of this entire bucket. We can define the performance, as in we want to have a standard or premium performance for any data that we are going to store. We can define the account kind. Let's suppose here we want to have the account for the general purpose or a blob storage. Blob storage is same like using the S3 storage service here. We can choose a blob storage. We can define the blob access tier that you want to use. And then once we are done, we can define the networking for it. That means in which network we want to deploy it. We can define the network routing as well. Click on data protection. Now we want to turn on point in time restore for the containers. That means in case of any kind of crashes, we want that all the data should be easily retried, that there should not be any kind of data loss. Then we can enable the data retrieval part. That means in case we are going to take in point snapshot, so that even if something goes wrong, we would be able to take a snapshot that we can use, and then we can use a snapshot for a quick restore. We can easily do that. All right. And here we can define turn on soft delete for Blob. For Blob, soft delete as in, just like we have a recycle bin, if we want, we can add the storage. We can add any service in the recycle bin as well. That means even if we accidentally delete any of the resources, we would be able to successfully recover those files as well. We can do that. And then we can allow the tracking the version for Blobs. For example, let's say if we are storing multiple versions, if we are uploading multiple versions in here, then we can easily restore all the versions for any file. For example, let's say we are uploading the same file after, like, we are updating a current file every week. That means as soon as the timestamp for that file changes, it is going to be stored as a new version. So we have been discussing on how we can deploy these different components as a part of the requirement of the blob storage. And if we are going to host a static website here, then we have to enable the public access. That means until as we give the public access to read and write, to read the objects being stored here, we won't be able to read the objects stored here in blob storage. So here we have to make sure we are giving that public access. And then once we are done, we can simply click on tags. Tags are useful for combining all the resources together. We can click on review and create. So once we are done, we can simply open this entire account here, and then we can start open this up in Explorer as Azure Storage Explorer. And then we will be able to work on this entire storage account for adding and updating any file that we want. And if you want, we can download the entire storage service as well as a part of Storage Explorer that we can make use of. So that's how we can work with the Azure services. Thank you so much for joining, guys, and have a great day ahead. Take care. Bye-bye.